Well, this house is for my family now, and if you want to stay, you'll have to help with whatever needs doing here, said my son Alex, his tone dry, the way someone lays down rules to a stranger. My name is Alfred Reed. I'm 78, born in Toledo, Ohio. I lived most of my life in a small house my parents left me. I worked construction from the time I was a kid, hauling bricks, raising walls until I became a site foreman. I didn't build a fortune, but I always had enough to live with dignity. When I retired, I kept taking small jobs to round out my income, and because of that steady discipline, I was able to set a little money aside. My youngest son, Alex, lived with his wife, Teresa, in a rented apartment in Springfield. Things weren't going well. The rent went up, his boss fell behind on his pay, and before I knew it, they were close to being evicted. I knew what it felt like to risk being without a roof. So I sold my little place and used my savings to buy a bigger 1-3 bedrooms so we could all live together. I believed I was helping the family and buying us a little peace. On moving day, I got up early, brewed coffee, and put out warm rolls. I helped Alex and Teresa carry their few suitcases into the back bedroom. I felt proud. The house still smelled like fresh paint, the yard was clean, and for a moment I pictured this as the start of something better for all of us. That afternoon, when I came back from the grocery store, there was a box truck parked out front. People were unloading mattresses, bags, a stove. I recognized Teresa's mother, Mrs. Louise, and with her came the father, 2 brothers, an aunt, and a teenage cousin. They went in and out like it already belonged to them. Teresa, smiling, said they'd be staying a few days while they got settled. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. In the days that followed, I realized it wasn't temporary. Teresa's father took over a corner of the living room with his things. Her mother rearranged my pots and pans. Her brothers used my backyard to park their bikes, and then came the requests that sounded like orders. "Mr. Reed, could you bring more water? You could sweep the yard." There was no please or thank you. Alex stayed quiet. Sometimes he wouldn't look at me, like he didn't want to face it. But when he did speak, it was to remind me that, to him, the house was now for his family, and if I wanted to stay, I had to help. I didn't answer, I just looked at him. Then I looked at my hands and kept brushing off my boots. I started spending more time on the front porch, listening to the laughter from the living room, the sound of a pot simmering on the stove, voices filling every corner of the house. I didn't need words to feel how my space was shrinking, inch by inch. That feeling standing in a place I paid for and no longer feeling welcome settled in quietly. The morning after Alex said those words, the sun came through my bedroom window, but it brought no warmth. It brought weight. I got up earlier than everyone, as always. I made myself coffee, keeping quiet. Back in my old house, I made coffee for everyone, set the table with sweet rolls, served with care. Now I wasn't even sure if there was room on the table to leave a pitcher without someone moving it. I went out to the yard with my mug and looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, with that crisp Midwestern blue you see after a cold front. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Teresa's father, who barely nodded and slipped out the gate. Not even a good morning. Minutes later, 2 of Teresa's brothers went out with their bikes, kicking up dust, and one left the gate wide open. I didn't feel at home anymore. Every corner was occupied by something that wasn't mine. In the living room, Teresa's aunt had spread a blanket over the couch to sleep. In the dining area, there was a big box of clothes I didn't recognize. In the kitchen, my utensils were mixed with theirs, and the old pans I'd used for years were stacked in a corner like they were no good. That day, while I poured a little more coffee, I overheard a conversation in the kitchen. Teresa told her mother, "We're going to be better off here, Mom. No one's going to kick us out here." Her mother answered, "That's right. This house is perfect for all of us. Mr. Reed is old. He doesn't need that much space." They didn't know I was listening, or maybe they did and didn't care. I didn't respond. I went to my room, opened the nightstand drawer, and took out the envelope with the deed. I ran my hand over that paper with my name on it and put it back. That piece of paper was the only thing that reminded me that, even if they wanted to erase me, I was still the owner. As days passed, the routine changed completely. No one asked if I wanted to eat. They served food, and if something was left, they put it on the table for me. Sometimes I had to reheat whatever remained. I didn't mind cooking for myself. What hurt was feeling like they'd quietly set me apart from the table, When Alex was around, he stayed in the bedroom with Teresa. We hardly spoke. When we did, it was to ask if I could give a hand with something. Take his brother-in-law's motorcycle to the shop. Go sort out the electric bill because you know the folks there better. Or fix a sticking door. Those were errands dressed up as trust, but I knew they were just things they didn't want to do. I started paying closer attention. Not spying, just noticing. I noticed the electric bill spiked. Too many devices, too many phones on chargers. I noticed the pantry emptied in a few days, and the groceries I bought disappeared fast. I noticed nobody but me cleaned the yard. One day toward the end of the week, I came back with a big bag of beans, rice, and cooking oil. I'd barely set the groceries on the table when Teresa said, "Oh, good, Mr. Reed, you brought this. That's enough for everyone." And she started putting it all away without even offering me a glass of water. That, for everyone, echoed in my head like a drill. In spite of everything, I didn't show anger. Rage, when you let it loose, just burns out. I held it in. I knew if I exploded, they'd paint me as the grumpy old man who won't share, and I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. In the afternoons, I sat on the little bench by the front door. From there, I watched the street, waved to neighbors, and mostly, I thought, not about how to leave, but how to stay on my terms. Silence can be sharper than a knife. One night, while everyone was in the living room watching TV, I went to the backyard with a blanket and stayed out there, looking at the stars. I remembered when Alex was a boy, running down dirt streets with a scuffed-up ball. I remembered how I built him a wooden tricycle because we couldn't afford a real one. I remembered the day he hugged me hard after I stood up for him against older kids. And I asked myself when that boy stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a burden. Sometimes questions don't have immediate answers. The only thing I knew for sure was I wasn't going to let them edge me out of my own life. I'm not a man of many words, but when I use them, they weigh something. For now, the weight was in my silence. A few days passed without big incidents, but the air was the same. Teresa's family talked about our house in front of me, like I was invisible. Alex didn't correct anyone. I began waking up earlier just to have a bit of peace before everyone else got up. That time was mine. The coffee, the cool air, the birds on the power line. One morning, while I was sweeping the yard, one of Teresa's brothers said, "Hey, Mr. Reed, can you hurry up? We're going to fire up the grill." I looked at him, steady, and said, "I don't rush out here, son. I clean my yard at my pace." He didn't yell, but he walked away, muttering. That day I confirmed that. Even without raising my voice, the way I looked at them and answered made them uneasy. That gave me a small satisfaction. Because even if they didn't say it out loud, they were starting to realize I'm not the kind of man you shove without pushback. That night, I locked my bedroom door, and like I'd gotten used to, I took out the envelope with the deed. I set it on the table and stared at it a while. It wasn't just a document. It was my strongest card, and it wasn't time to play it yet. I needed them to truly believe I was beaten. Only then, when the moment came, the hit would land clean. For now, my plan was simple. Endure, observe, and wait. Patience mixed with memory is more powerful than anger. On a Tuesday morning, the noise started before sunrise. It was 6 o'clock and the blender was roaring. The TV in the living room was blasting, and Teresa's teen cousin was on the phone at full volume. I sat on my bed looking out the window and thought it might be time to change my routine. Not to adapt to them, but so they wouldn't always find me in the same place at the same hour, like I was part of the furniture. I got dressed, boxed up my most personal things, a few photos, an old watch, the envelope with the deed, and put them in the wardrobe. Not that I feared they'd take them, but I preferred they not be out in plain sight. Then I left without a word and walked to the town square. I sat on a bench, greeted people I knew, and sipped a hot coffee I bought from a cart. It was the first morning in weeks where the air felt like it belonged to me. When I came back, the kitchen was packed. Teresa's mom and aunt were arguing about what to cook while the father watched TV with his feet on the table. Alex wasn't there. They looked at me like they'd just remembered I lived there. I said nothing, went straight to my room, and read an old newspaper. That afternoon, I ran into Alex in the yard. He asked if I could lend him some money to help cover the rent on a friend's small shop where someone had loaned him a motorcycle. I looked at him, took a breath, and answered, "Not right now, son. I'm saving for my own things." He didn't like it. His face changed, but he didn't press. It was the first time since we moved in that I told him no. It hurt, but it was necessary. In the days that followed, I went out more. I went to the market, but I also stopped to talk to neighbors, visited an old friend who runs a carpentry shop. I didn't say much about my situation, but I listened and noticed. Every outing reminded me there's a world beyond those walls, and Teresa's family doesn't control it. One Sunday morning, while everyone slept, I got up early and made breakfast. Eggs and hash browns, warm toast, fresh coffee. I set the table like I used to, with clean plates and folded napkins. I sat and ate alone. When folks started waking up, I was already washing my dishes. Teresa said, "Oh, you didn't make enough for everyone." Without looking up, I said, "Today I cooked for me." Everyone starts their day their own way. The kitchen went quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard her mother mutter something under her breath, but I didn't care. That small act gave me something I hadn't felt in a while. Control. It was my way of drawing a line, even in something simple, and I discovered it made them uncomfortable. They weren't used to me acting on my own without offering up anything. Over time, I did other things like that. I washed my clothes separately, kept my groceries in a bag inside my wardrobe, and locked my bedroom when I left. It wasn't to isolate myself, it was to make clear some parts of me and my things didn't belong to them. One Thursday afternoon, Teresa's oldest brother left his motorcycle in the backyard, blocking the way to the laundry sink. When I came out with a bucket of clothes, I asked him to move it. He said he was in a hurry and would get it later. I didn't argue. I went to my room, grabbed my set of keys, and moved the motorcycle myself, setting it out at the curb. He stormed out angry, saying I had no right to touch it. I looked him in the eye and said, "And you have no right to block my way in my house." That last part shut him up. That night, Alex came into my room without knocking, like always. He asked if there was any problem with his in-laws leaving more stuff in the yard because they were fixing a room for themselves. I told him the yard wasn't a storage unit, and if they needed more space, they could find it elsewhere. He pressed his lips together and said I was changing. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence weighs more than an argument. Meanwhile, I kept storing everything in my memory. I didn't write things down, but I remembered every look, every word, every disrespect. Not out of spite, but because one day it would be useful. At night, when the house finally quieted, I sat on the porch and watched the distant lights on the hill. I thought about my father, who taught me to never give up. He used to say, "Son, the ground you work with your hands is yours, but you've got to defend it." And even though the ground now was concrete and lumber, the principle was the same. One day I decided not to eat at home. I left early, went to the market, bought a plate of pulled pork, and ate it sitting on a bench in the square. When I returned, Teresa said they'd cooked and saved me a plate, but her tone wasn't kind, it was controlling. I thanked her and said I'd already eaten. That simple answer irritated her more than I expected. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to let them decide what I ate either. Every small choice was a step back toward my right to decide my own life. Little by little, the house began to feel my absences and my silences. I wasn't the quiet old man in the corner. I was the man slipping out of their grip, not reacting the way they expected. And though they didn't know it yet, each step I took outside their control was a brick pried loose from the wall they'd built between us. I knew we weren't at the breaking point yet. But when that moment came, they wouldn't find me weak or resigned. They'd find me ready. The tension in the house stopped being invisible. You could feel it in the air, like the heaviness before rain. I felt it with every step down the hallway. Every time I opened the kitchen door and found eyes that didn't include me. No one had to say a word. The walls spoke for them. One Friday afternoon, I was sweeping dry leaves in the yard. Teresa's older brother sat on a plastic chair, staring at his phone. I asked him to move his backpack because it blocked the walkway to the laundry sink. He didn't even look up, just said, "I'll get it in a minute." I kept sweeping, but 10 minutes later it was still there. I picked it up and set it in a corner. Then he looked up and said, "Hey, Mr. Reed, you don't have to touch my stuff." I looked right at him and said, "And you don't leave your stuff in people's way. Learn that." My voice wasn't loud, but it had weight. He stood, huffed, and went inside. Minutes later, I heard him talking to his mother and Teresa in the kitchen, saying I was in a bad mood. I didn't care. I went back to my work. That same night when Alex came home, Teresa met him at the door. I didn't hear it all, but I heard my name more than once. He came into my room without knocking. "Dad, what's going on? They say you're picking fights." I folded my newspaper and looked at him. "I'm not fighting, son. I'm asking for respect. If that bothers your people, that's not my problem." That last part stung. He stayed quiet a few seconds, then said, "Remember, this house is for everyone. If you want to stay, we need peace." I gave the faintest smile. "Peace starts when people respect one another, Alex. Remember that too." He didn't raise his voice, but he left clearly upset. As days passed, Teresa's family started changing small things to rattle me. The chair I always sat in at the table one day had a box of tablecloths piled on it. My coffee mug vanished, and when I found it, it was out in the yard full of dirt. The pantry spot where I kept my food was crammed with cans and bags that weren't mine. It wasn't an accident. I didn't answer with shouting. I answered with action. One Saturday, I got up early and set my chair on the front porch where the morning sun always hits. While I ate breakfast, Teresa's mother came over and said, "That chair belongs in the living room. Put it back." I said, "I bought this chair. It stays where I put it." She didn't answer, but her face hardened. That afternoon, I went to the market for fruit, bread, and cheese. I stored everything in a box I kept in my room. When Teresa noticed, she asked, "What's that? Are you keeping food in your bedroom?" I said, "It's what I paid for, so it doesn't go missing." She pressed her lips and said nothing, but her eyes were angry. The small clashes became frequent. Not shouting, but sharp looks and measured words. Alex tried to stay out of it, but his silence was more about convenience than solving anything. As long as there wasn't a scene, he kept away. One afternoon, while I was fixing a door in the yard, I heard Teresa's teen cousin say to one of her brothers, "This old man won't be here long, you'll see." I stood still, making sure they didn't know I'd heard. I didn't answer, but I kept those words. That night I ate alone on the porch. The air was cool and the streetlights blinked in the distance. I thought about everything that had happened since we moved. I remembered each little slight, each word meant to make me feel small. More than anger, I felt clarity. They thought I was cornered, with no choice but to comply. What they didn't know was they hadn't seen what I'm capable of when someone tries to erase me from my own ground. Sunday morning, I decided I wouldn't stay cooped up all day. I went to see Dan Miller, an old work buddy who now runs an auto shop. We spent hours talking and drinking coffee. When I came back in the afternoon, Teresa greeted me with a sharp tone. "You missed lunch. We made a big pot roast for everyone." I smiled. "That's great." I ate with a friend and kept going. I saw her expression tighten. She wanted me always under her thumb, available for her schedule, her rules. Every time I broke that expectation, her hold on me slipped a little. And that little by little made her lose patience. That same week, Alex asked me for money again. He said it was to cover household expenses. I asked which expenses. He stammered. Said it was various things. I told him, if you can't say exactly what for, I can't help. He got upset, but he didn't insist. The ground was shifting. It wasn't time for a final move, but it was time to make clear I wouldn't be moved like a piece on their board. Every time I held firm, they noticed, even if they didn't admit it. Thursday night, while everyone watched TV, I took a walk. The night air cleared my head. I paused in front of the church and stood quiet for a minute, thinking. Not about revenge yet, about strategy. The patience I learned in decades of work was more useful now than ever. When I returned, the house was quiet. I passed through the living room and saw my chair empty. I put it back where it belonged and sat down. Not to watch TV, but to be there present, occupying space that's mine. They could move my things, talk behind my back, but as long as I kept reminding them I wasn't invisible, the story wasn't over. The July heat in Springfield was unrelenting. That week, the sun beat down on the metal roof over the patio, and the air inside grew heavy. I got up early, as always, to enjoy the cooler air. I was sweeping the porch when I heard a hard clatter in the kitchen. I walked in and found Teresa's teenage cousin had knocked a pot to the floor. "Wasn't me, it fell by itself," he said, shrugging. The pot one I bought just a few months ago was dented. I picked it up and, looking him straight in the eye, said, "In this house, when someone breaks something, they say so and take responsibility." He let out a mocking laugh and walked away. Teresa, washing dishes, looked at me and said, "Oh, Mr. Reed, don't get upset over a pot. Everything here is for everyone." That was like pouring salt in a wound. I looked at her and said, "No, Teresa, nothing here is for everyone. There are things I paid for that I allow everyone to use. That doesn't mean they don't get taken care of." She frowned and said no more. Late morning, Alex came back from work. As soon as he walked in, Teresa told him about the pot her version, saying I'd been scolding the boys. Alex came to my room. "Dad, what's going on? I don't want problems over little stuff." I closed the book I was reading and said, "It's the little stuff that breaks respect, son. If you don't stop it early, there's no way back." I don't know if he understood, but he stayed quiet. He rubbed his face and said, "We all have to learn to live together here." I looked at him and said, "Living together starts with respecting what isn't yours. If not, it's not living together. It's taking advantage." That day I decided not to have lunch at home. I went to Martha's Diner, a place I've known for years. She greeted me with a hug, served me beef soup and a cold soda. We talked a while, and it felt good to be heard without being judged. When I came back, late afternoon, the house felt charged. Teresa's mother called me into the kitchen. "Mr. Reed, we need to talk." I sat, already knowing where this was going. "We've noticed you've been keeping to yourself lately, like you don't want to share with us. And around here, everyone has to pitch in and help." I took a breath and answered, "Pitching in isn't taking orders. Helping doesn't mean doing everything you don't want to do. And sharing doesn't mean everything I own gets used without respect." An uncomfortable silence fell. Teresa's aunt, who'd been listening, muttered, "If he doesn't like it, he can leave." That was the first real jolt of anger I'd felt in weeks. I stood slowly, looked at both of them, and said, "I'm not going anywhere. I bought this house, and as long as my name is on the deed, I'll be here. If you don't like that, you know where the door is." I walked out of the kitchen. That night, Alex came to my room. He closed the door and spoke quietly. "Dad, we can't keep going like this. Teresa's upset. Her mom is too. If we keep this up, it's going to blow up." I told him, "Problems don't start because I set boundaries, Alex. They start because you all think you can erase me from a place I bought for all of us." He didn't answer. He ran a hand through his hair and left. The next days were a silent war. No one spoke to me more than necessary. They served meals without calling me. I cooked for myself, didn't wait for an invitation, washed my dishes, put my things away, and spent more time outside than in. But on Sunday afternoon, it exploded. I was in the yard watering plants when I heard furniture being moved in my room. I went in and found Teresa's younger brother and the cousin moving my wardrobe. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than usual, even to my own ears. "Nothing. We're just going to store some stuff in here," the kid said, like it was nothing. I stepped over, shut the wardrobe hard, and said, "Nothing gets stored in here that isn't mine. Out. Now." They looked at each other and one muttered, "Crazy old man." That's where I didn't hold back. "Not crazy, owner. And if you come back in my room without permission, I won't be responsible for how I react." They left, muttering something I chose not to hear. That night I locked my room and put the deed in a safer place. Something told me I couldn't leave it out another day. I barely slept. I heard footsteps, doors, whispers. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe they really were planning something. What I did know was that the time for only watching was ending. It wasn't about small slights anymore. Now they were crossing the line into my personal space. If they crossed it once, they'd do it again and again until nothing left belonged to me. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I remembered a line my father told me when I was young. "Son, when they try to push you off your own ground, don't argue. Act." That line stayed with me until morning. And morning, that time, meant something new. Patience has a limit, and mine was close. The week after the incident in my room felt different. Not because Teresa's family changed, but because I'd made a decision in silence. I wasn't waiting to be thrown out. I was going to move first, and to do that, I needed a plan. Monday morning, I left before anyone woke up. I walked to the square and sat on my usual bench across from the church. There, I ran into Dan Miller, my old work friend. I bought him a coffee and we talked a while. I didn't tell him everything, but I said enough for him to know I needed advice. When your own house stops treating you like the owner, it's time to remind them who you are, he said. His words stuck. Before going home, I stopped by the law office where I signed my deed years ago. I said hello to Attorney Whitman, an older man who's known me for decades. I asked, like it was nothing, about the process for making a few changes regarding a property. I didn't give details, but he walked me through the steps. I left with a clearer head and a folded paper in my pocket, a list of documents I might need. When I got home, nothing had changed. Teresa and her mother were in the kitchen. Her brothers were watching TV. The cousin was napping on the couch. No one asked where I'd been. I went to my room and put the list in the envelope with the deed. In the days that followed, I organized. I sorted what really mattered and what I could leave without regret. I realized most of my belongings weren't valuable, but they meant something to me. Photos, letters, tools I'd used for years. I packed them in a sturdy box and hid it in a corner of the wardrobe under an old blanket. On Wednesday, while everyone was busy, I did something I hadn't done since we moved in. I checked every inch of the house. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just measuring the ground, figuring out what was truly mine and what they had taken over. I saw the backyard shed, which had been empty, now stuffed with boxes from Teresa's family. I saw they'd put a padlock on one bedroom that was free at the start. I wasn't surprised. It confirmed they were still advancing, taking more and more. I said nothing. I just observed. And as I observed, I drew a mental map for my next move. Thursday, I went to the market early. I bought the usual things, and at the hardware store, I picked up a small combination lock. That same afternoon, I put it on my bedroom door. Teresa noticed and asked, half curious, half annoyed, "And what's that for?" I answered without raising my voice. "To protect my things, same as you protect yours." She said nothing, but I saw the message had landed. That lock was my first visible act of defense. From there, I felt I could start taking ground back. Friday, Alex asked me to go with him to the bank to make a deposit. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to observe. While he talked to the teller, I looked over the brochures and remembered Whitman's words. I knew that, if things went as planned, I'd be going back to the bank soon for my own business. Things Alex couldn't imagine. That night, while everyone watched a show, I went out to the yard and looked up at the sky. The air felt warm before a storm. I thought of my father again, the way he'd say, "Storms don't announce themselves, but if you're prepared, you don't fear them." I was getting prepared. Saturday, after lunch, I went to see another friend, Ernest Carter, who'd worked with me on several jobs. He knew people at the county office and at the recorder of deeds. We spent the afternoon talking, and little by little I told him more. I didn't have to say everything, just enough so he knew I was about to make an important move. "If you're going to do it, Alfred, do it fast and without warning. Don't give them time to react," he said. That became part of the plan. I came home with a steady step, like nothing had changed. Inside, though, I felt a mix of nerves and resolve. Sunday at breakfast, Teresa's mother said, almost like a public notice, "We'll be fixing up the yard soon to give us more space." Alex nodded. I set my cup down and said, "No one touches the yard without my permission." The silence that followed was long. I wasn't looking to argue. I wanted it clear that, though I kept quiet most of the time, I wasn't blind or deaf, and I still had a voice. That afternoon, I took another walk. I passed by the law office again, but didn't go in. I just looked at the door and thought about the list I had tucked away. I had everything I needed, except one detail, which I'd get in the coming days. The next Monday, I left early saying I was going to the market, but I headed someplace else. I went to the county recorder's office to confirm what I already knew. The house was still in my name no liens, No co-owners. I walked out with a certified copy under my arm. That paper, with the deed, was my strongest proof. When I came back, everyone was in the yard laughing and grilling. No one asked where I'd been. I poured a cup of coffee, sat in my chair, and watched. They thought I was resigned. They didn't know that while they fooled around, I was moving the pieces that would decide how this ends. That night, before bed, I took out all the documents, the deed, Whitman's list, the recorder's copy. I spread them on the table and looked at them a long time. I'm no scholar, but I can read well enough to know what I had in my hands. Leverage. Leverage used at the right time is stronger than any shout. I put everything away and lay down. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the calm of patience gave way to the certainty that it was almost time. The August heat clung to the skin like a damp blanket. From early morning, the house was loud. The TV blared in the living room. A blender roared in the kitchen, voices everywhere rising and falling like a crowded market. I sat by my window drinking coffee in silence. I knew it would be a long day. Late morning, I went out to hang my laundry. Teresa's younger brother sat on the steps smoking. The smoke hit me all at once. "No smoking out here," I said, firm. He laughed and said, "This is everyone's yard now, Mr. Reed." I stood still a second. Then I walked over, took the cigarette from his hand, and crushed it out against the brick. "No, this yard is still mine, and while I'm here, my rules stand." He looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. At lunchtime, Teresa set the table with plates and silverware for everyone except me. Not an oversight. I stood, watched the scene, then went to the kitchen, got a plate and silverware, served myself, and sat at the head of the table like I always had, and began to eat. No one said a word, but the heavy silence felt like a fight without shouting. Alex came home that night. He looked tired and uncomfortable. He said we'd had too many run-ins, that Teresa's family felt attacked. I told him, "Respect isn't an attack, son. You've got things mixed up. You think because I don't yell, I accept everything. I don't." He didn't answer. The next days were a string of provocations. My porch chair disappeared one day and turned up in the aunt's room. The space where I kept my market bag was filled with big jugs of water that weren't mine. I found someone had opened one of my boxes in the wardrobe. That last part lit me up. I decided I wouldn't let a single thing pass. Wednesday, when I saw the teen cousin using my tools to fix his bike, I walked over and said, "That toolbox is off limits. If you need something, ask. If you don't know how to ask, you don't use it." He smirked and said, "And if I don't?" I took one step closer, looked him in the eye, and said, "Then you'll learn the hard way." He stood and left the tool on the table. That afternoon, I put a second lock on the cabinet where I kept my most important things. Teresa noticed and asked, "Afraid we'll steal something?" I said, "I'm not afraid, I remember. And memory says it's better to prevent than regret." Friday at breakfast, Teresa's mother said loudly, "I think we should reorganize the bedroom soon so we're more comfortable." It was like she threw a rock. I set down my cup. "Nothing moves unless I say so. If you don't like that, the door's open." She gave me a look full of contempt and walked out. That night, Alex came to talk. "Dad, don't you think you're being too hard? You're making everyone uncomfortable." I took a deep breath and said, "Alex, I've been uncomfortable since this house stopped being my home and turned into a boarding house where everyone demands and no one thanks. And I'll tell you something else. That deed still has my name on it, and I won't let anyone take what's mine." He went quiet for a few seconds. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked at him. "You'll know when you need to." From then on, I changed my routine. I went out more, but not to the same places. Sometimes I saw Dan. Sometimes I stopped by the law office. Sometimes I went to the market, but took longer than necessary. I didn't want them to know exactly where I was or who I spoke with. One Sunday afternoon, while everyone was busy in the kitchen, I slipped into the backyard shed and looked over the boxes they'd stacked there. I didn't care what was inside. I wanted to know how quickly they could clear out. I realized most of it could be hauled off fast if needed. I smiled to myself. In that house, the only people who could be displaced in an instant were them. That night, while I ate alone, I felt the moment coming closer. I didn't know if it would be a week or a month, But each invasion of my space pushed us toward a point of no return. Before bed, I set the deed and the recorder's copy on the table next to Whitman's list. I turned on the lamp and stared at them. They weren't just papers, they were my exit key and my shield. That night I dreamed of my father again. I saw him young, with dirt on his hands, looking at me and saying, "When it's time, son, it's time. Don't let it pass." I woke up with that line in my head. As the morning sun came through the window, I knew the time was almost here. Monday dawned with a strange feeling. Maybe it was just me, but every sound in the house felt louder, more present. The clinking of spoons, voices in the kitchen, the TV already on. I dressed, tucked some papers into a folder, and left without saying where I was going. I walked to the law office. Attorney Whitman greeted me with his usual formal calm. "Do you have everything ready, Mr. Reed?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the deed, the recorder's copy, and my ID. "Perfect. We can have the rest prepared in 2 days." I didn't go into details, and he didn't ask. That's what I liked about Whitman. He knows when not to talk. I left there and went straight to the bank. I withdrew a substantial amount I'd saved over time. I put it in an envelope inside my jacket. Then I stopped by the store. I bought a few small things. Bread, coffee, some fruit, so nothing would look unusual. When I got home, Teresa's aunt was at the door. She looked at me with that nosy curiosity you can't hide. "Where were you so early?" she asked. "Taking care of my business," I said, and walked past. Nothing more to add. That day I stayed on the porch longer, reading an old paper. Teresa's mother passed by a few times, eyeing me. Something in my calm made her nervous. Maybe because for the first time in a long time I wasn't angry or resigned, I was steady. That afternoon I went to Alex's room. He was on his phone. "Son, I need you to sign a paper as a witness," I said. He looked surprised. "What paper?" He signed without reading much. It had nothing to do with the house yet, but it fit a move that would soon make sense with the rest. The next morning I left early again. This time I went to see Ernest at his shop. I brought him a coffee and we sat in the office. I told him I was about to make a major change and might need help moving a few documents quickly. Ernest smiled. "You tell me when, and we'll do it quiet." That line told me I had what I needed. That afternoon when I came home, the living room was a mess of bags and boxes. I asked what was going on. Teresa answered, "We're seeing how to rearrange things so we're more comfortable." I looked at her and said, "Don't move a single thing that's mine." She shrugged, but her eyes showed how my certainty bothered her. That night I put the folder with the documents in a different place, outside my room. I wasn't going to risk them finding it if they ever decided to snoop. Wednesday at breakfast, Alex said he'd heard I'd been handling paperwork. I gave a half smile. "People always talk, son. That doesn't make it true." I knew curiosity was part of the game. I spent the day moving like nothing was different, but inside I felt each piece falling into place. If everything went right, in a few days the story of this house would change, and not in their favor. That night, while they chatted in the living room, I sat on the porch listening to the wind and quietly told myself, "I'm ready." Thursday. I was up before dawn. I got dressed, put the folder in a leather bag, and slipped out. The street air was cool, just what I needed. I walked straight to the law office. Whitman was already waiting. "Ready to sign, Mr. Reed?" he asked. I nodded. We sat down, reviewed each page, and he explained every point. I didn't need it. I'd already read it all at home, but I let him go on. I signed where he pointed once, twice, 3 times. He signed, stamped, and handed me a copy. "With this, the change will be official in a couple of days," he said. I put everything away carefully and shook his hand. I left and went to the bank. I made another important transaction, this time with a clear goal. The teller handed me the receipt. I folded it and slipped it in with the papers. It wasn't the kind of thing just anyone would understand at a glance. But to me, every move connected. Before going home, I stopped at Ralph's store, a man I've known for decades. I bought some big moving boxes and asked him to deliver them to my address. "Moving, Alfred?" he asked, smiling. Something like that, I said. Not a lie. When I got home, Teresa and her mother were in the kitchen, talking low. They saw me, but didn't ask anything. I went upstairs, shut my door, and started filling boxes. Only what mattered, what had value to me. The rest could stay. That afternoon, Alex came in and found me mid-task. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked. "Organizing my things," I said without looking up. "Why, are you leaving?" I shrugged. "You never know. Good to be ready." That night I hid the folder in a spot only I knew, a false bottom in an old suitcase that belonged to my father. No one but me knew that compartment existed. Friday morning I went out again, this time to the county office. I handed over documents to the clerk and signed another form. "With this, everything's on record," he said. Like snapping in the last piece of a puzzle I'd spent weeks building. When I got back, the house was too quiet. Inside, everyone was in the living room. Teresa, her mother, the brothers, the cousin. Alex was standing. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I sat in a chair across from them. "I'm listening." Teresa spoke first. "We don't think it's working for everyone to live like this. We think it would be best if you found a place where you can be more comfortable." I looked at her a few seconds, then looked at each of them. "I see. So you want me to leave the house I bought?" Alex tried to soften it. "That's not what we mean, Dad. It's just, there are too many people here and—" I raised my hand. "Don't worry, son. Today I took care of everything I needed to take care of." I went to my room, came back with the folder, set it on the table, opened it slowly, took out the deed and the certified copy. "See this? It says clearly who owns this house. Same as day one. Me." I watched their faces change. Some went pale, some scowled. Teresa folded her arms. "And what does that mean?" I leaned forward. "It means I decide who lives here. And as of today, this house isn't for everyone. It's for people who respect the rules. You didn't." Alex took a step toward me. "Dad, don't do this." I looked right at him. "Son, I didn't start this. I'm finishing what you all began." I pulled out another paper. "This is the notice I filed today. As of next week, you all have to leave." A heavy silence fell. Teresa's mother stood, red with anger. "You can't do that." I straightened up. "I can, and I will." I turned and went to my room. I locked the door and sat on the bed. Outside, I heard raised voices, fast footsteps, doors opening and closing. I didn't care. I knew I'd broken their illusion that they could control me. I slept better that night than I had in a long time. The next morning, the house felt different. No laughter, no music, just a thick silence cut by whispers in the kitchen. They were talking about me and what I said the night before. I didn't care. I poured my coffee, took it to the porch, and let the sun warm my face. After a while, Alex came over. He looked worn out, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. "Dad, are you really going to do this?" he asked. I looked at him without harshness, but firm. "Alex, I gave you this house so you could have a home, not so it could become a place where I have no say. I gave you time, patience, and respect. I didn't get the same in return, and everything has a limit." He tried to argue, tried to say we could talk it out, but it wasn't about reconciliation. He was negotiating to lose as little as possible. I wasn't interested in halfway. "There's nothing more to talk about, son. The decision is made." In the days that followed, the house felt like a battlefield. Teresa avoided me, but her brothers threw me looks full of resentment. The cousins stomped past my door on purpose. Teresa's mother ignored me completely. I responded to none of it. Thursday, the official notice arrived. The mail carrier rang and handed over a big envelope. Alex took it and set it on the table. Teresa tore it open without waiting. She read it quietly and said, "We have a week." Then came the arguments among them, the phone calls, the thrown-together plans. I stayed out of it. Sunday morning, I saw Teresa's brothers packing up. The cousin carried bags to the car. Teresa kept going back and forth with boxes. Alex came to my room. "Dad, I don't know if I can find a place that fast, but I'll try." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, spoke gently. I don't wish you harm, Alex. I just hope this helps you understand that choices have consequences. Always. By Tuesday, the yard was full of things ready to load. Teresa's mother passed by without saying hello. I didn't expect one. By mid-afternoon, the last car rolled out the gate. Alex was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway. He looked at me but didn't speak. Neither did I. I closed the gate and stood a moment looking at the empty street. The house was quiet. I walked through every room. Some were dirty, some empty. I didn't feel sad. I felt at peace. I made myself a coffee, drank it on the porch, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while, that place was truly mine, not just on paper. In the days that followed, I cleaned the house, put my things back in place, and locked the rooms I didn't use. I went back to my old routine, early coffee, a trip to the market, conversations with friends. The calm had returned, but it wasn't the same as before. Now I knew what it cost to keep it. One afternoon on the porch, I thought about Alex. I didn't know where he was or how he was doing. Maybe one day he'd understand it wasn't about money or property, but about respect. And if he never did, it wasn't my job to teach him anymore. What I did know was I had no regrets. Doing what's right isn't always comfortable, but sleeping with a clear conscience is worth more than any discomfort. And if you've listened this far, I'll tell you this. Never let anyone erase you from your own story. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, rich or poor, your dignity is priceless. Now tell me, if you were in my place, what would you have done? And while you're at it, where in the country are you listening from? Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs it. Because sometimes a story like this is the nudge someone needs to take their place back.